Hello everybody, and welcome to the 5th episode of Existential Basics. I'm Mark, with the Modern Existentialist, and I'll be your host today. So last time, we covered the idea of fundamental agency, and we explored the Existentialist's deconstruction of the debate surrounding the ideas of free will and personal responsibility. If you haven't seen that episode, I'd recommend you go back and watch that before coming back to join us for this one. Alright, so in our 3rd episode, we outlined and discussed the philosophy that forms the foundation of nihilist absurdist theory. As a quick recap, we established that nihilists and absurdists both believe that metaphysically objective truths are the only real truths, and that our fundamental inability to access them means that we are only left with fake truths. That none of the things that we consider to be real can actually be thought of as truly real. Because of their investment in their dogmatic system, nihilists have managed to reason themselves into believing themselves to be pure object. They think that, because the consciousness that they believe they feel is just a trick played on them by their biology, that they can only ever be acted upon by their circumstances, they're therefore completely and irreconcilably impotent, with no agency or power to act. Absurdists, on the other hand, believe that these fake subjective truths are the only thing that we have, the only thing we'll ever be able to experience. And so, they manage to reason themselves into believing themselves to be pure subject. They believe that, because our world is fake, we're therefore perfectly free, with all the agency and the power to do whatever we want. Here, though, we can see once again that the nihilists and absurdists are both empirically wrong. After all, it can't possibly be the case that we're purely objects in the world, because we believe that we think and feel within our minds. If we were just objects, like a stick or a rock, then we'd be incapable of believing that we're anything at all. To believe, to think, implies that we must first exist. After all, if it were the case that we didn't exist, then what could be the thing that's doing the thinking? It also, however, can't possibly be the case that we're purely subjects in the world. We know empirically that we must also be objects. After all, we're always constantly being acted upon. If we were pure subjects, then that couldn't be the case. But in reality, we can observe that we're biological beings which exist within the constraints of a physical world. Even beyond that, though, we can observe that we are social beings which live within the constraints of a social world. We can't be purely subject in the world, can't be purely actors, because we're acted upon. We also, however, can't be purely object in the world, because we are also actors within it, who act upon it. We can't be only either subject or object, because we can see that, empirically, we're both. In every moment, as people and as agents, we're both subject and object. We both act and are also acted upon. As human beings, we don't each live in our own vacuum. We can't be individual subjects by ourselves, because that wouldn't make any sense. After all, individual is a contrastive descriptor, a word that describes a specific person in contrast with a general everybody else. That means that the concept of the individual, the subject, can only exist in contrast against its opposite, the collective, the objective, or, essentially, all the other people that aren't this one. After all, if there was no one else, no other person to stand in contrast against the individual, then what could it even mean to be an individual? An individual what? As human beings, we're only truly human when we are a we, when we're together. You and I are social animals. The need and desire for contact and companionship is hardwired into our biology. We only function in a way that we'd consider normal or human when we've had the chance to live and learn in the company of others. In other words, we only act like people because we learned how to be people from other people. Sartre said this, that the gaze of the other fixes us in facticity, and the existence and the world which we share with one another, and what's popularly considered to be reality. Let's say that there's a man who decides one day that he's fed up, tired of living his everyday grind. He packs his bags with essentials and leaves, walking down toward the docks. He hires a local fisherman to take him out to one of the uninhabited islands off the coast. There, he thinks, he'll become a hermit and live the peaceful, solitary life of which he's always dreamed. When he finally arrives on that island's shore, he says this, "Ah, I am alone, and last." Now, we can say pretty conclusively that the hermit is free to make this choice. That he might be considered generally eccentric, but that he's free to exercise his agency in his pursuit of abandoning society. What we can never say, though, is that in choosing to abandon society, he now exists all alone in the world, as purely and only either subject or object, because he must still be both. He can't be purely object, because, even though he's alone, he still has choices that he must make. He also can't be purely subject, because he can still be acted upon. For example, by the wild animals living on the island, and also by objectivity itself, by the sun and the rain, and the seasonal hurricanes, which batter the island in the summer months of every year. And while it might be true that he's given up his continued involvement in society, it will never be the case that he can consider himself to no longer be an object, because he'll always still have been acted upon as a product of his society. After all, he was born to a mother, grew up alongside others. Even if he never had any friends, he still spent years watching and learning as human children do, by observing the behavior of others. For all his life, he had access to social contact, to the opportunity to interact with the other. That is what made him human. And that is what makes us human. And now, no matter what choices he might make, nothing can undo what's already been done. Nothing that we could do in the future can ever make us any less human than we've already become. If we stop and think for a sec, though, what does it even mean for someone to become human? After all, in the first place, aren't we all just born human? Well, it's obviously not up for debate that we're all biologically human, and that makes us all human in a sense. But there's another sense in which none of us are born human, and that's the sense in which our human biology, by itself, doesn't provide us with all the basic characteristics that we'd think of as being typical or innate to every human being. In other words, We're not born walking and talking like any normal, average person. Those are things that we learn, and we learn them from watching each other. What makes us us, what shapes us and distinguishes us as human, is the choices that we make and the actions that we take, our goals and desires, and our unique subjective experience. But just as much as any of those things, it's also equally our interactions with one another, the things that we choose to do together, and our unique collective experience. In other words, the way in which the gaze of the other fixes us in a common reality. In the 1700s, a feral child, around the age of 12, was found roaming the forests of southern France. Today, he's known as Victor, the wild child of Aveyron. When he was discovered, he was naked, his body covered in scars and calluses, and he was unable to speak or form words. Rather than just being mute, it was discovered that, in reality, he just never learned how to talk. The evidence here seemed to point to the theory that Victor had lived alone in the wild for probably most of his life. That, at least, was how it seemed to one Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard, a doctor of the time. He remarked, after all, that when Victor was discovered, he resembled less of a man than a beast. The doctor adopted Victor, making it his mission to try and civilize the boy. That's to say that he wanted to try and teach the boy how to be human, how to walk and talk like a man. He put him in clothes and cut his hair. Then he began to instruct him, trying to imprint onto the boy the two traits that the doctor believed made people human. Two fundamental characteristics that separated beast from man. For the doctor, these were language and empathy, the two traits that, together, allow the human individual to live and exist in the company of others. Two traits that, today, we'd consider to be normal, essentially innate to the nature of human beings. After all, when we look at examples of people who are missing these traits, who can't walk or talk or intuit feelings the same way as other people, we consider them to be abnormal, to be disabled in some way, broken and in need of fixing, because they're missing something. In the end, the doctor was unable to civilize Victor. He noted that, while Victor did make some progress in acquiring empathy, he was never really able to learn or understand language, at least to any meaningful degree. The doctor came to think of his work as a failure, and so, giving up, left Victor in the care of an older local woman. There, he lived out the rest of his life, eventually dying of pneumonia at the age of 40. Feral children are incomplete. There's something missing from them, something that we'd consider fundamentally human, but that can never be recovered because it was never there in the first place. It wasn't missing at birth. It was never a function of their biology. They weren't born without their humanity. Instead, it was denied to them. In their process of becoming human, they just simply weren't provided the opportunity to be complete. As human beings, as social animals, our interaction with the other is fundamentally what defines us. We think and learn and grow together, and we shape one another through our socialization. We speak and communicate through our use of language. We feel and know through our use of empathy. That is what makes us human. We are born as nothing, as children with nothing more than just human biology. Our biology, the simple fact that we are beings, doesn't make us human by birthright. What it does, instead, is give us the chance, the fundamental potential and opportunity to become human. We are human, you and I, not by right of birth, but because we've made each other so. Sartre says this, that man is not and cannot be only just being alone, not only a subject within a world of objects, or Dasein, as Heidegger might claim. This is because man is necessarily, after all, also equally just as much an object of the world. Sartre goes on to flip Heidegger's terminology upside down in order to show us that he's actually empirically wrong. Sartre argues, after all, that man's nature as a subject doesn't make him a being, but instead actually makes him a nothingness. We are born into the world tabula rasa, as blank slates, as Locke would say, as children with nothing but human biology. Because we're fundamentally subjects, because we're agents who are personally responsible for our own actions, we are therefore undefined until we make our choices. Man is defined by his choices, by how he chooses to exercise his agency, and how he chooses to act within the reality which we share. That is how a nothingness becomes a something, a being. Man isn't either object or subject, not either a being or a nothingness. Instead, he's both, all at once, object and subject, being and nothingness. All right, so how do you feel now, being both a free agent, but also just a social animal defined by your society? What do you think makes a person human? If you were given the job, how would you have taught Victor to become someone who could live a full life and function within a society? Give it some thought, and let me know down in the comments what you come up with. Alright, this is Mark, signing off. Catch you guys on the next one.